Hello, 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 and welcome to a very special episode of Potstilled Live. As always, I am your host, Matt Healy, and today we are having a fantastic Roe Co takeover of Potstilled Live, and we are celebrating the illustrious career of Miss Caroline Martin, who is the Diageo Whisky Team's Master Blender, and also in today's episode, most importantly, Roe Co Master Blender. She is set to retire this April, which is just, I suppose, the next month. It's a couple of days away. But we are following on from her momentous 35 years in the drinks industry. And we are going to speak to not only Caroline, but also Lora Hemy, Lora, head distiller of Roe Co Whiskey, and also Peter Simpson, who is the head brewer at the Guinness Open Gate Brewery. We're going to talk all about the creation of Roe Co, as well as Caroline's fantastic career and the collaborations that are going on James's Street between Roe Co Distillery and the Guinness Open Gate Brewery. I suppose I want to welcome everyone to the show. This is the first time we've done a four-way chat that is going to be so filled with information. And it is also the first time to welcome I don't think I've had a caliber of guests like this before. We have a master blender, a head distiller, and a head brewer. We've got all angles of alcohol, fermentation, and distillation and blending in one chat. So I suppose, first of all, Caroline, very welcome to you, and thank you so much for giving us your time. And to Lora and to Peter, thank you guys as well. I suppose I'll start with you, Caroline. Where are you joining us from this evening?
I'm joining you from Bonnie Dundee. I just moved here tail end of last year, so it's all new. We're obviously still in lockdown, but hoping in retirement to be able to explore the area. Yeah, nice.
Well, that's very good. And is that a new move ahead of the retirement, or is that closer to where you want to be?
A bit of both, Matt. It's the big new project for retirement. So yeah, new house, new garden that's still to be sorted. And just explore the area around about. We're looking forward to it. My husband's retiring the same day, and he works for Diageo too.
That is quite a serendipitous story. I'm sure it's perfectly planned, but it sounds serendipitous, so I like it. And Lora, where are you joining us from this evening?
I am literally in my upstairs sort of hidey hole at home, which is about 5 minutes around the corner from the distillery in Dublin 8, and I'm actually going back there later, so at home.
So I have nabbed you in between being in the distillery. I very much appreciate you taking the time to jump in with us. And Peter, Mr. Simpson, where are you joining us from?
I'm at home as well. I'm in Kildare, in Carbery, in County Kildare.
Oh, fantastic. Well, to all of you, thank you so much for your time. I know I am taking up the combined caliber of Diageo staff at the moment, and I really appreciate both you guys and Roe Co for organizing this. I suppose I want to start with you, Caroline. How did you get into the whiskey industry, and how have you, I suppose, pursued your career to where you are today as a master blender?
It's been a really interesting journey. Gone through different phases. So if you wind the clock back almost 35 years ago, I came to Diageo having qualified from Queen Margaret College in Edinburgh with a BA degree in home economics. And as the final year, I focused on food science, and part of the agenda, if you like, was to do recipe adaptations. So even from an early start, before the career started, I was blending different foods together, and that blending theme has followed me all the way through my career, which has been good fun. But I started in the new product department in Diageo, not necessarily whiskies, although some of the products were based on whiskey. And it was just really feeling our way. This was the first time ever that Diageo of its time was creating new drinks and being really innovative. So we were at the forefront of all that happening in Menstrie, close to Stirling. And from there, it's true to say that I really got passionate about all things sensory. How we described our products, how they tasted, and how we as experts in the field actually connected with the consumers, because that's critically important. I mean, we can do all the blending we like, but if these products don't engage the consumers, then what's the point, really? So I did go off to our sensory department at Menstrie on secondment, which was meant to be 6 months. And I got so interested in it, I never came back.
A long 6 months.
It was a long 6 months, but I really enjoyed it. And just, training people at the sites and getting them on board with language and descriptors and being able to pick different samples out from each other as part of the quality assurance. I mean, that was critically important and still remains so. So that was a part of the role that I really enjoyed. It was to get people engaged, get panels trained, and be competent. And then just before the millennium, that's when I actually came over onto the whisky side of the business and tried to apply that learning from sensory onto whiskies, which is quite different from flavoured products. And just, getting your palate used to what flavours are in different malt and grain whiskies for Scotch takes a lot of time. And you've got to stay at the bench and get that practical experience to gain your experience. To be able to apply it. So that's been it in a nutshell. That's a whistle-stop tour.
So say it's quite a synopsis of 35 years in the industry. That was good. It was about 3 minutes. It was just concise.
Yeah.
A
lot more detail underneath that, of course.
Exactly. One of the things you mentioned there in particular that piqued my interest was when you're saying how to convey it to consumers. So you're not only training the teams internally and working on sensory analysis, but you're also trying to, I suppose, speak to the people internally on how they speak to the people externally. Because if you guys can be the most trained sensory people in the world, but I imagine the conveying all of that to the consumer is very important.
Yes, and that's correct, Matt. But we also have to listen to what the consumers tell us. And that was something that was really new and innovative of its time, was when we came to blend Roe Co. We were working in collaboration with the brand ambassador of the time. And that was critically important. That footprint was instrumental in making sure that what went out as Roe Co when it was eventually launched, we knew ahead of the time that consumers would love that whisky, because we had worked in collaboration with the ambassador. So me creating the prototypes, small scale, 100 mils of 2 or 3 different products. I would give these prototypes to the ambassador and he would engage with the consumers. He was a bartender, had all that experience that I didn't have, but that mechanism of feeding back from the consumers directly to me meant that I could use that constructive feedback to fine-tune the product. So that was really important to be able to work in that way.
And first of all, that's fantastic insight to hear, because you hear people say all the time, "Oh, we went to market and whatnot," and you literally the legwork was done. The blends hit the street, as it were. But I suppose for people watching at home that don't know, I suppose, you're saying that you were able to tweak them on the far end after blending and creating them. I suppose for people at home that don't know the role of a day-to-day role of a master blender, what actually does the job entail, and particularly perhaps in the guise of making a Roe Co blend and then tweaking it on the far end?
Yeah, and I've heard so many blenders say it before, but there's never 2 days alike, and that really is true. But if you follow it from a supply chain perspective, in order to blend mature whiskies, you've got to start with new make spirit. And that is really important to get your head and more importantly, your nose and taste buds roundabout as well. It needs to be in spec, that new make spirit. Otherwise, nothing will correct it thereafter in the supply chain. So a good grounding in new make spirit quality and what language you would use to describe it is the starting point. After that, it obviously gets filled into casks, and again we can select different cask types to give the mature flavour that we want to work with. So we need to manage the casks as well, that they perform and they do what we expect of them. And then we as blenders get the really privileged opportunity to sample from that maturing stock, even before it's whiskey. So we can sample from a few months in the maturation process, and nose and taste at that point, and then continue that sampling way beyond that. And that is a real privilege to be able to do that, because me as a blender, I get to pick the right flavours. And I think that's what I want to be doing. Is it's not necessarily about an age statement. It really is about the flavour style and what is going to connect with the consumers. And so all the way through that is can be innovating new products, but a lot of the time as well, it's about ensuring the quality of our blends, Scotch and Irish, for Roe Co. And we are custodians, we are protectors of the blend quality. So that is really important for part of our role as well. So the innovation stuff is really exciting and new and takes us to a place where nobody else has been before if we do our job right. But we are the people who look after what is currently going in a bottle and what consumers currently appreciate. So all of that is part of the role.
Fantastic. I think people often forget the sheer skill and analysis that does go into blending. You know, people think of the fanaticism around, maybe single malt scotches or even cask strength single malts, but the being able to create a product that tastes the same, whether or not you consume it in Shanghai or in San Francisco is truly a skill. And I really enjoyed listening to you there explain about you're finding the flavors that work. And I'd love to bring Lora in here because often I think people assume that when new distilleries start up, the distiller kind of creates a flavor profile that they're happy with, or the distills make, or the grains available make. But in this scenario, you're working with initially aged stocks and then rolling into a new distillery, and obviously that's always going to be a very interesting transition and challenge. And how did, I suppose, between the two of you, what was the plan when the distillery started to create a flavor profile that worked for Roe Co as a blend?
I think, Caroline, you had the genius brief of actually taking it down to its component parts essentially, and breaking down into profiles that we might achieve separately, and that's one of the really unique things about what we're doing at the distillery, is that following Caroline's lead and the brief that she set for our spirit character, we're actually working with two really distinct profiles in production and actually blending them together at the distillery. So we're working with blending before we've even hit wood, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And as a distiller, why would you not want to be working with one of the world's greatest blenders on such a cool project with such a great brief? That is instantly, I want to do that.
It's good fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think to be fair, I mean, Lora is really experienced in all things sensory as well. So a massive credit to how Lora interpreted my brief, if you like, and my descriptor for the new make spirit. But it is a novel approach as well. And using that experience between both of us, we could understand what we were saying to each other, and we interpreted it, thankfully, we interpreted it well, and we're laying down new make stock, which will be used in the future. So that's something to look forward to. I'm not going to be here, but I'll be looking for it on the supermarket shelves when it's there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's really cool to come at it from sort of two opposing time perspectives, I guess, and I think that's where distillers and blenders have this really fantastic symbiotic relationship, and I think that's definitely true in how we've done this at the distillery. So super excited to see the progress, and Caroline will be first on the list when we have mature spirit.
And it's funny to me as an outsider looking in, it almost seems like you're both blending just on two different ends of the scale. Lora, you're blending those flavors at the creation, and Caroline at the maturation, I suppose. But
you're exactly right, Matt. It's good that you've understood that. I've never really looked at it in that way before, but it makes sense. So well done. Yeah.
So I suppose there was a lot there's a lot gone into the brand in the genesis of it. There now, Lora is taking the helm on the flavor creation and matching the character that you've set about. How did we've already spoken about how the blend hit the streets, but there was, I believe it was the 106th blend that you put together was what Roe Co is, say behind me here, the Roe Co original bottle. I suppose, how did the final product come to be?
That was quite some time in landing it, actually, Matt. I started the journey when Helen Mulholland from Bushmills was working alongside me, and I remember we sat down at a meeting and we had this brief to come up with an Irish blended whiskey, and I was really keen and eager to get involved in Irish whiskey because as people recognise, I don't have an Irish accent, and all of my life working with Diageo had been working on Scotch whiskies. And again, it was just fulfilling that dream of looking at different whiskies. How do you describe them? What differentiates them? And so to begin this project, it was very much a joined master blender approach, which was really exciting for me. The project was put on hold when Diageo decided Bushmills was no longer going to be in their portfolio, and so that project was done at that time, and then it was resurrected a few years down the line, and I was really chuffed to bits to be asked to start this new project, if you like. And the brief was much the same, but it was like I didn't have anybody to support me on it, and to learn all the different flavours that applied to the whiskies in our inventory, our Irish whiskey inventory. It was very much a steep learning curve for me. The blending part is very similar. So first off, I had to look at what was out there in the way of Irish whiskey. So what was the competitor set, and how would I describe them? Other people might well describe them differently, but it was me that was going to have to craft this new blended Irish whiskey. So I had to get my head round about where were the other products sitting, and where, if anywhere, was there a niche that I could blend this new product to fit into. So that took me a few weeks, actually, going back to the same samples to see if they had changed and would I describe them differently. And over time, it was becoming clear to me that there was a gap, and it was how I was going to populate that gap with the new whiskey. The next again stage was looking at the inventory. So what did I have available to me to be able to hand pick and choose the different flavours that I wanted to be in this new blend? And again, it was getting my head round about that. So different whisky types. We had malt whisky, grain whisky, and pot still whisky, which is different from Scotch. We had them maturing at different lengths of time in the cask, and we had different influence from the cask types as well. So all that matrix was getting bigger and bigger as I looked at it. But it was time well invested, and these prototypes were coming thick and fast at the start, and I reached a plateau where I gave these prototypes to the ambassador, and that was the next big stage. So all the time, these prototypes had been blended at 40% alcohol, because that, again, is the legal requirement, same as Scotch. But one really big bit of constructive feedback was in a cocktail serve in particular, 40% just was not cutting through all the other ingredients. So it made me stop and think, and back to the drawing board. And what we have ended up with, obviously, in our Roe Co Cornerstone blend is 45% alcohol. And I had to take it to that strength to work well as a straight mix, which was on the brief, but also with a straight mixer, so neat and a straight mixer, and also in a cocktail serve. And so that adaptation over time took time, and it took the prototype 106 for me to be proud to put my name on the bottle and to say, look, we have tested it. I'm really confident that what we have in the bottle is going to be successful and people will enjoy it. So that's why it took 106 prototypes.
It's always funny for me thinking in my head, seeing, numbers and often, particularly new brands as well, will have on the label maybe, recipe number, whatever. And it's always a low number. And there's always a seesaw moment in my head wondering, is it better to have tried 106 and found the right one, or to stop looking on your first blend? And I
to push the boundaries, man.
Yeah, of course. And I give you major kudos on the longevity of your search as well. That must have been quite, and even when you were doing the different blends with the brand ambassador, I'm sure you were finding, like you said, the ABV wasn't high enough, and I'm sure there's tweaks to the cask maturations or the volume of different component parts, and I think that's a part of the whiskey industry that people often forget, that it's not just taking cask A and cask B, put them together, and out the door you go. So when, I suppose today, perhaps last month, as we're coming to celebrate your retirement from the industry, but say last month, and every time, before that, are you still in charge, I suppose, of the archetype blend of Roe Co that must be adhered to, or has that, I suppose, the ownership devolved into the distillery itself?
I think to be fair, it is still about collaboration, and that's the way that I would like to see it continuing, because it is a partnership, and I think that is important to maintain the consistency going forward as well. So we are laying down stocks, or Lora is laying down stocks for the future. I think for me, as I reach retirement, it's been really important to do a handover to someone else in the whiskey team. So yeah, I'm really confident that the future of Roe Co is bright, and the innovation pipeline is full of really good ideas, and I wish I could stay around to see them come to the fore. But I've got to hand that over to somebody else, and we need to ensure, as a whiskey team, as a blending team, that again, as well as all the other scotches that we do, that Roe Co is kept consistent, the core blend. And if innovations are big in volume, again, that consistency is really important, because once you have adopters as consumers liking your whiskey, the last thing you want to do is put them off by inconsistency. So that's important going forward as well.
Absolutely. I want to bring in Peter here at this point. Obviously, Caroline's been talking about collaboration a lot in everything we're doing. The Guinness Open Gate Brewery, obviously facing the front door of the Roe Co Distillery. I suppose, Peter, from your end, what is it like having the distillery across the road? And I suppose, your end of the business is very much a fermentation based expertise, and I know Lora is experimenting with a lot of fermentation as well as distillation styles. What's it like for you having the distillery across the road, and is there a lot of, I suppose, sharing of ideas between the two sites?
Yeah, I mean, it's great having the distillery across the road. I mean, myself and Laura bump into each other numerous times a week on site, and I think what the real spark of the collaboration was, I was starting to experiment with barrels and barrel aging with beers in the Guinness Open Gate, and then when Laura came and the distillery opened, we started chatting, saying, what can we do with these barrels once I've finished with them? Because for beer, unlike whiskey, it's quite tricky to reuse a barrel after you've had a beer in there, unless you're putting it in straight away because of microbial contamination and things like that. If you want wood character, if you don't want any wood character from the barrel, you can keep using it by sterilizing the barrel, and you get less and less wood character every time you use it. But normally when you age a beer in a barrel, you want that wood character. So we were building up a number of barrels that we'd used that had nowhere to go. So having a chat with Laura and Caroline was like, let's do this something together and find a home for these, and let's have some fun and create something interesting.
So, and that kind of spiraled itself into the Cask and Keg series, I believe. between, which is collaboration between Caroline and yourself and Roe Co and the Guinness Open Gate Brewery. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And they created some absolutely amazing products, some amazing beers, which were great on themselves, and the whiskies are absolutely stupendous.
Before we deep dive into that, what, for people watching at home that don't, haven't been playing around with barrel maturation of their IPAs or their saisons, why for you as a brewer why wouldn't you reuse those barrels? I know you said there's small things, but like people at home perhaps don't know about Brettanomyces or souring of beers. What kind of off notes or effects would you get, or perhaps lose, in the sense of sterilizing the barrels?
Yeah, so if you say you got yourself a nice bourbon barrel, when you put your first beer in there, you'll get quite a steep ABV increase because the barrel is quite wet and there's quite a lot of spirit still in the barrel. And the osmotic pressures between whiskey and beer are different. So that spirit will come back out of the barrel and into the beer. So you get quite a steep ABV increase, but without any further fermentation. And that, once, it gives you a huge amount of flavor impact. But also, you'll get an awful lot of that oak character. So the American oak, you get lots of vanilla, things like that. And that's the first time you use it. If you're careful and you're good, you don't get any Brettanomyces, you don't get any lactic bacteria, you don't get any acetic, and you come out with a brilliant tasting beer. Once you empty that barrel is then full of oxygen, and aerobic bacteria can start flourishing very, very quickly. So at which point, either you fill the barrel as immediately after you've emptied it, or you need to sterilize that barrel. By sterilizing, you're typically using steam, which heats the wood and will kill any microbe. It'll then also start leaching out some of the wood flavor as well. So every time you sterilize and reuse the barrel, you're getting less wood character, to the point where you don't get any. If you think of some of the Belgian lambics, they're all aged in oak barrels, but you get very little oak character coming through from those because they are repeatedly used and repeatedly sterilized every time they're refilled. So it's quite a fine balance of how many times you use it and the flavor you get. And unfortunately for beer, you're not able to keep the beer long enough to be able to blend some barrels that are freshly filled and some that are second or third fill, because the beer just doesn't last that long. Beer is a much shorter shelf life than whiskey.
Exactly, and particularly that shelf life aspect also lends itself again back into when the beer is actually in the wood and the oxygen and the aerobic bacteria is getting in there. It's the exact same idea that's going to be start turning it sour. So I suppose the Roe Co blend is made at this point. The distillery is happily experimenting and churning away and getting great consistent product following Caroline's flavor profile that Lora has taken upon the distillery. Where in the world, I suppose, did you have the barrels going on in the brewery, but I suppose where did talk me through the first conversations you had, and then bring me through to how we now have 2 barrel-aged Roe Co whiskies.
Yeah, so I've been experimenting a little bit more with bourbon barrels and a few Scotch barrels, a couple of Talisker ones, which created some very interesting beers. They were love it or hate it beers. And I think then it was down to Caroline and the brand team finding that we have this brewery on the doorstep of the distillery. Let's see what we can do together. Let's find what beers work well in a barrel. Let's find what flavors work well then coming through into the spirit. So between Caroline and myself, we went through quite a number of Guinness beers and Guinness Open Gate beers, and settled on the Citra Ipa, which is not a beer that you would typically age in a barrel. A hoppy IPA, is not something that you normally put into a barrel. And then something a bit more mainstream, a bit more typical is the Antwerpen Stout, which is a beautiful stout, which is robust and 8% to begin with. And then when you age it in the barrel, it just grows to something absolutely wonderful.
Absolutely. What was the process like and for anyone that doesn't, I suppose, know the Guinness Open Gate Brewery, if you go in, obviously it's a, I'd say akin to an American style beer tap room of a brewery, and a fantastic open setting. You can see the fermentation vessels, you can see some of the barrels you're using, and then the kind of revolving wall menu of everything that's coming through the brewery. And obviously there's some fantastic things that have gone through there. I've personally enjoyed some Goza style beers, some chili stouts, there's some fantastic lagers that come through there. How did you sit down and, I suppose, between you choose a Citra IPA, and like you mentioned, the Antwerpen Stout, stout beers have a history of cask maturation. As many Irish people will know, Guinness was at one point the largest cooperage in the world. So there's a long history of stout in barrels, but Citra IPA in particular, how did you sit down together and go, that is exactly the character profile that we're not only going to throw into wood, but to draw out again with the whiskey?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my side, it was a little bit more of the experimentation, and what is at the heart of Guinness Open Gate is experimenting, doing something that is not normally done, and seeing what happens. And then I think I'm not going to talk for you, Caroline, but it was the flavor profile of the Citra that your sensory.
The two options in terms of stout IPA were chosen because they were quite different from each other, and I think that was critically important. But to build on where we are with the flavour profile for Roe Co, we have a soft fruitiness in Roe Co, which I describe as being like poached pears. There's a soft, spicy note, but it's juicy, it's orchard fruits. So there's a soft fruitiness there. And I selected, between us, we selected the Citra option because it in itself is really fruity and zesty and vibrant. So I wanted to accentuate and pull out the fruitiness in Roe Co by filling into the cask that previously held Citra. The other one, the stout, was much more robust and roasted, coffee, chocolate, all these dark flavours. And that really intrigued me. So it was probably to satisfy my own curiosity. But I think both work equally well. If I was to select a favourite, and I'm taking you on that journey with me, to me the Citra is just exceptional. We did do lots of samplings, and Lora was involved in that as well with some other people. But that the flavour change over time just, for me, jumped out as being sensational, and we caught it at the right time. I think if we had left it in the barrels any longer than we did, then it would have changed and it wouldn't have been as good as it is. So yeah, two different flavour styles, two innovative products, and again working with collaboration. That's the theme of Roe Co, is about the and co being about collaboration, which is important.
Absolutely. I suppose I'm going to ask you, Caroline, first, and Peter, the exact same question to you. Was there a fear or worry in your head about hops in the barrel and subsequently in the whiskey for you, Caroline?
I think my nervousness was about my lack of experience with the whole brewing side of the industry, and I was concerned more about the microbial spoilage and what that could do to the whiskey. So I was really protective of where we're going to take it. But I think, again, it's about pushing the boundaries and being like George Roe, being a pioneer. You need to try new things, and sometimes they'll fail, but you'll learn from it. Fortunately, this time with both of these, they've worked really well. So, yeah, more innovative products in the market.
Absolutely. And Peter, for hops in cask for you, was that just an easy experimentation solution?
It was just experimenting. I mean, you normally wouldn't put hops anywhere near a barrel where you got a bit of oxygen, and because you typically end up with sweaty socks or blue cheese character coming through in your beer, which you really don't want.
Yeah.
But I think for me, for the Citra IPA, again, we caught it right at the end of the barrel as well, because we did start getting some souring. There were some hints of lactic and some Brettanomyces character coming through on that. I think had we left it another month, those would have been much too overpowering, and probably the barrels would have been unusable for Caroline and Laura at that point as well. But I think what was also key along that is that we actually refilled those barrels with Roe within 24 hours of emptying them of the beer, just to give us that little bit of extra security in around that microbial risk.
Peter and Caroline, you don't know about this about me, but having worked in businesses that were both breweries and distilleries, I've done a lot of this kind of cask collaboration before, and I've made the mistake of leaving freshly disgorged casks alone and they were only left alone for 3 days. I think the warehouse team didn't swap them over fast enough, and the world of craziness happened to those casks in that time. And it is, from a beer point of view, we were terrified of dissolved oxygen. We were worried about what's going to happen to the beer, and it essentially, it was they got dropped into the filling station, didn't get filled quickly enough. Half of them soured, and then half of them ended up with this like weird white, like mold bacteria in them. Obviously, every single cask was unusable, and at that point, particularly depending on what casks you're using, that's an expensive mistake to make as well. Not just, not only, depending, and one of my next questions is, how long the beers were matured before the cask went over to Roe. But when you have a project that you've now spent 3, 4, 6 months aging a beer in, and you meant to bring it over to the whiskey side, and you fail that execution, that's not only the cask value now gone. You've also just spent 6 months prepping a project that now takes another 6 months to come along. So, I people might hear this and think, oh, fair enough, whatever. That's filling in 24 hours. Very serious point when trying to move from beer into anything else. But Peter, just before we do progress, how long were the beers in cask before they went back to Roe?
They're in there about 7 months. Now, personally, I probably would have left the Antwerpen a little bit longer and the Citra slightly shorter. But the logistics of it, we did them both at 7 months, which is about typical for your barrel aged beer.
Yeah, and then Caroline, from the distillery point of view, how long were the Roe whiskies left in those casks before they get bottled?
Yeah, it was about a similar timeline. We were sampling regularly, which I think is critically important to do as well, because that flavour shift was quite exceptional, particularly towards the end, and you need to keep an eye on where is that flavour going. So yeah, it's important to get that flavour impact, but not to overshoot it. So it was a matter of months as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I suppose it's perhaps a good time that we have, I suppose, the two bottles behind me here with the lovely white labels, end capping Roe Co and the cask strength. Perhaps be a good time to stick our nose in some glasses and talk about the characteristics. Yeah. Is there one you'd particularly like to start with, or?
I usually start with the lighter in character, so I would say that's the Citra.
Okay. Yeah.
So again, just referring to the alcoholic strength, this one is at 56.6% alcohol. So just be careful on your nose. It's quite strong in terms of bottle strength. So just gently does it. And I think, when you're doing it in your own time as well, take the time, invest the time to compare it with Roe Co, the 106 blend, because that way you appreciate the aromas and flavours that differentiate it from the Cornerstone blend. But for me, coming to this fresh, it's just so vibrant. It's very as the name implies, for me it is about citrus fruits rather than poached orchard pears. It's more than soft now. There's a vibrancy. It's fresh. It's zesty. There's subliminal notes under there that take it to apricots and a softness, but it's very clean. And I've tasted it, and I'm used to what it actually tastes like. But if you feel comfortable to do that, then just see if these flavors carry through.
I have to say, I am no master blender, but I have tasted and created some fantastic. There's lots of barrel aged beer barrel aged whiskey on the market. This literally tastes like I'm drinking a Citra IPA, and I don't mean that figuratively. Lots of beer cask whiskeys have almost familiar afterthought aromas and flavors of the cask they were in. This literally tastes like a Citra IPA.
Yeah.
I'm very confused as to how much this actually, and particularly there's you can smell, like you said, on the nose, there's that citrus and lovely fruits, but on the palate there's almost an effervescence and coming through, like,
it's got a mouth-watering characteristic, hasn't it? That citrus note carries through to the taste.
Yeah, but I get a slight acidity on it. You get that slight acidity coming through from that. That helps boost the citrus character, I think.
Yep. And that depth of character that you find in Roe Co, that was why it took 106 prototypes before we landed it. We wanted that exceptional depth of character. But doing the Citra has taken it in a different direction, and for me, it's brought with it an intrigue. So you're identifying the Citra IPA right away, Matt. But for me, not really being familiar with these, it was more about, I really like this flavour, and it is citrusy, and it's kind of drawing me in. And so I think that the combination really works, and it just accentuates the fruitiness, takes it in a bit different direction, but it still works.
Absolutely. In the background, I've just added an ever so small drop of water just to see what the change is. And on the nose, that almost a lemon oil, more so like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of stupid, but it's almost like doing a hop rub in your hands. That lemon oil is coming through on the aroma, and then on the palate, again, that's almost still fruity, but opened up more that kind of the drier citrus, almost pith or skin maybe as well. Almost an expressed citrus. I'm bamboozled and flabbergasted over how much this. I have not tasted a beer cask finished whiskey that tastes so close to the beer, but also retains whiskey character, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I've had overpowering and I've had lackluster. This is perplexing and delightful at the same time. So thank you to all of you.
You get the hoppiness as an aftertaste as well, which is really interesting for me. You get the citrusiness, which is the mouth watering when you taste it initially. Once you've swallowed, you get that bitter, hoppy taste, but not in an unpleasant way. It's just a different characteristic.
Absolutely. Clearly, Peter can brew some good beer too. So,
well, what was very interesting is that the Citra IPA beer out of the barrel was so different to what it started from. Yet you're getting more of the original beer characters coming through on the whiskey.
Very interesting, yeah.
So you started with the Citra IPA, you created a completely different beer, but the whiskey retained the characters of the original beer. So you ended up with a triangle.
and for you, Peter, when these projects are complete, excuse me, these aren't just sacrificial beers. You take those at the end and I suppose, deliver those to the people that like to imbibe upon the Guinness Open Gate Brewery's tap list.
Absolutely. There's very, very little beer that goes to waste in the Open Gate. It always finds a home. But yeah, I mean, because we only did 2 barrels, 2 casks of beer. It was a very limited release and very exclusive mailing list. You got some small pack. But yeah, those beers didn't go to waste. They found some good homes.
Absolutely. So perhaps is this a moment to delve into the Antwerpen Stout, perhaps?
Sounds good. Yep.
So, Karen, could you talk us through what the ABV on this
Yeah,
whiskey
yeah.
is?
So again, cask strength. This one's 55.9. So again, just approach it knowing that, and right away you can tell the difference between these two. So that's what hits me initially when you're doing them side by side. It's a good way to highlight differences between products, but it's much heavier than the Citra. And when you go back to it, it continues to evolve, and you find that with a lot of whiskies. You get the first impression, and then you go back to nose it again, and it just builds and builds. I don't know, Matt, have you had a chance to nose it yet?
I have.
How would you describe it?
See, this is one of those things. You being a master blender, asking me to describe it. So it's one of those, exactly. It's always in my former careers as a brand ambassador, I was always told never ask a room their opinion on a glass, because everyone would be too afraid to give their opinions. And now I'm feeling very self-conscious about my choices of words. But I mean, for me, when you're talking about the roasted malt, like on the palate, I'm getting a lot of that roasted malt, but on the nose, it's probably the first whiskey I've truly nosed cacao nibs. I've seen cacao nibs as a flavor descriptor on multitudes of whiskeys, but this is truly the one that I'm getting an overwhelming sense of sticking my nose into a bag of cacao nibs. And I'm finding this very interesting to nose.
And the fact that we used first fill bourbon with the Roe Co and a lot of the whiskies that we chose for it, I think that soft vanilla creaminess is carried through, and it works really well with the cacao nibs that you're talking about, Matt. So you get that intensity and the depth of character, but it's soft at the same time. It takes me back to candy floss and spun sugar, so that there's that inherent sweetness in it, but it's almost going towards a savoury note compared to the Citra one.
For me, again, I've just added having tried it first, I've added a small amount of water, and I've got a compound flavor that came at me, and it was like American s'mores, like the biscuit and marshmallows and chocolate. And I like, in my head, I like that because you've got the vanilla, you've got that, again, that little bit of sweetness, the roast, the kind of cacao nibs, and then the grain coming through as well. But that was a big, the first thing that jumped out of me in the glass out of that.
And I think going back to the original brief for Roe Co, it was about a contemporary blend, and it had to be approachable and accessible so that people who were not whiskey drinkers, if they gave it a try, then they would start to appreciate the flavours in there. And I think both of these whiskies, the innovations, definitely do that. And you will get people who will lean towards one rather than the other. And that's really important because we want to appeal to different consumers as well. But the important message to take away is you have to try these things, especially nose, but you need to taste it as well to appreciate what it delivers. And just like you were doing by adding a touch of water, try it different ways because you might like it neat or you might prefer it in a cocktail serve. Citra works really, really good with a high-end tonic water. I like really simple cocktails because I'm a bit old-fashioned that way. But tonic water in Roe Co and Citra, it just makes it come alive for me.
I like it. And you're saying that the Roe Co is designed to appeal to different consumers. Having been to the distillery quite a number of times, I think it certainly embodies that in the actual distillery itself. And I know that it's a showpiece distillery in a sense of how it's designed and laid out, and it's in the old power station for Guinness. But it's it has something for everyone, but is not only showpiece. Laura, I want to hope to bring you back in here. That while it's aesthetically beautiful, and there is the cocktail bar, and they do have the fantastic store as well. Laura, I know you have a pretty crack team of distillers in there working with you, and oddly, I keep finding people who work in the Roe Co Distillery by sheer accident. It's like a friend's roommate, and like my work colleagues, like brother, it's a fun little microcosm of continuously running into Roe Co employees. But going forwards with finding and distilling Caroline's flavor profiles, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis for you? And I know you mentioned that there's kind of different fermentation times and expectations for the flavors. What does that look like, I suppose, as your part of the role?
Yes, I mean, we built the distillery to, I guess, work with a wide range of spirit characters. I talk about it in this a lot as laying down flavor blocks, and I guess acting as a sort of a spice rack for Caroline to then go and reassemble later. But that's what we're essentially doing. We're creating these blocks of flavor that can then be remixed into all sorts of different configurations. So whilst we're laying down our core characters, which form going to form the malt component of the blend in the future, we can do a lot of other things. We can play a lot of other tunes, and we've been doing that already. Actually, we've been working quite widely with fermentation. We actually laid down some double distillation. Our stills do all sorts of cool things. We can lay down triple distillation, double distillation, anything in between, and we've certainly been doing that. So I guess it's laying down an artist's palette of different spirit types that we can then not only tweak in the distillery, but then tweak in maturation, and then reassemble again when we're putting together grains. So it's a complex jigsaw puzzle, and I guess that's how I'd describe my job. It's sort of assembling pieces that we can use again later. But look, it's a manual distillery. It's for the most part, we've automated a lot of the stuff underneath the mezzanine level, so still discharge and things that you wouldn't really want to be fiddling around with under stills and too late at night. But look, the flavor impactful processes are very manual, very deliberately. We wanted them to be, and just like Caroline's been explaining how we wanted to appeal to a broad range of consumers, we also wanted to show them how we do it, and that's really important. It's why the distillery was designed the way it was. Having said that, there's a very cool basement that I can't take people on tours when we are open, that's full of all sorts of little twists and turns and interesting pieces of kit. And actually, we've got some kit down there that will allow us to work with different cereal types. We've got our mill. We've then got all of the stuff that's been put in for sustainable purposes that actually then gives us extra functionality to make cool flavor too. So my job is a lot of fun, and it's a lot of climbing around on ladders too, and sort of tearing around the place really.
And I believe there is an old tunnel between yourself and Peter down there. You can sneak across to each other.
There is. It's bolted at the moment, but I might let Peter in one day. No, it's great. I've only been in it once, actually, to my shame. It's like the set of an old sci-fi film down there. I mean, it's St James's Gate is full of these hidden secrets. It's real.
So from an experimentation point of view, working, I suppose, with the Roe Co profile, what does that allow you to do from a distillation and maturation point of view? And then obviously it has to tie into something that Caroline wants to do on the far end. But what kind of things are you, I suppose, able to talk about on a stream like this?
We've got some very cool projects involving wood. I guess I'm interested in deconstructing the idea of what maturation actually is on a certain level, and that's something that ties in with the blender's role. So we're working a lot in that space, and certainly on the distillery end, on the spirit end, we've got some super cool projects coming up with yeast. Now, obviously, those are going to take a wee bit of time to come to fruition, so that's very long-term thinking, but some really interesting yeast work, which I think will be pretty new to market when we do get to release it. So I guess we're playing with everything in that respect, but staying true to the idea of Roe too. I mean, we have the identity of our liquids that is being safeguarded by Caroline and her team, but what we make it also has to reflect the strength of that and complement it.
Absolutely. And I suppose back to you, Caroline, I suppose I presume there is a handover team or a handover person that will be taking up the mantle as you enjoy putting your garden together in your new home.
Yep.
Who will be taking that mantle from you?
So yeah, really comfortable at handing over to George Harper, who works in the Whisky Specialist team beside me at the moment. He has a wealth of experience, particularly around about Johnnie Walker. So he's been at the bench, looking at our building blocks for Roe Co, nosing them and putting his own form of words round about it, because you need that freedom to be able to describe them and be comfortable with your form of words. So yeah, that experience is ongoing, and I'm really interested to see what spin he puts on it with Lora and Peter going forward. So really interesting times in the future for Roe Co, but we need to maintain the quality of Roe Co as well. That's critically important, and I'm sure that'll be done. I've no qualms about that at all.
Well, that's great to hear that. I suppose the team is in safe hands, and Roe Co as a brand is in safe hands. If people were out there, watching this now that are thinking of getting into the whiskey industry at large, and I know you've worked with not just whiskey, but of course, liqueurs and RTDs and other parts of the Diageo portfolio. If you were to, if it was yourself, maybe you're going back to speak to, or someone starting off in the industry today, do you have any advice for people that are, I suppose, pursuing a role in sensory or otherwise in the industry?
Yeah. I think the critical skill to be a blender is all about the ability to be able to nose and taste and describe comfortably what you're working with. But if you wind the clock back again to school times, I would really encourage people to, if they're interested in science-based subjects like chemistry and biology and a bit of physics as well, but all these type of topics really lend themselves well to getting into the whiskey industry. The sensory bit you can build on. You need to have a minimum base level of competency, but that evolves over time. And I'm still learning. I mean, I stand at the bench routinely and I mix A with B and it comes up with something completely different. And you would expect that, but it probably takes me in a different direction sometimes, which keeps me on my toes. But yeah, encourage everybody, whether you're male or female, it should be about your capability. But things have changed. I would say if you wind the clock back again to when I started, it tended to be more males in the role, and it's nice to see that has changed over time to include people who, as I said, have got the competency. That's the important skill that we're after. So go for it. Follow your dreams. If you're at all interested, I would say go for it and push the boundaries. Yeah,
that's very fair. And if you were to look back, I suppose, putting the gaze wider than our Irish whiskey, was there was there a product launch or a career highlight or something that you look back fondly and think, I suppose, perhaps think back often on, that really stuck with you throughout the 35 years?
I think there's not one particular point. I think I've been really privileged in that there have been lots of different events and opportunities, traveling to exotic places that I would never have gone to if it hadn't been for working in Diageo. So going to Guatemala and meeting the master blender for Zacapa rum was an obvious highlight. More recently, going to America for Roe Co launches, that was exceptional, going to different states as well. And it's about that connectivity. So meeting with customers, or even just working with a superb team like Roe Co and the whisky team as well. I think, that dynamic has got to work, and it brings out the best in people, and you play to people's strengths. And that's why it's really important that we have a team that we can lean in on, and we know who's good at different things, and we can play to that. So lots of happy memories. I'm taking them with me, and looking forward to retirement. And what that brings. Who knows?
Exactly. I'm going to put you on the spot one more time before we wrap up. Outside of the whiskey sphere, because obviously you started elsewhere and moved into the whiskey sphere, was there one product that you did work with in any, I suppose, the portfolio apart from the whiskey end that you very much enjoyed?
In terms of a product launch,
Oh no, just a product you worked with in general.
I think ones that are close to my heart, because they were one of the first products that I helped launch. So take it back to the early 90s probably, and it was Belle's Red Devil Liqueur. So it was based on Belle's Scotch whisky with chili flavours and a bright red colour, as I remember it. And something completely different, but of that time was Terry's chocolate orange cream liqueur, and I can still taste it yet, and it was divine. So they're in the archives to prove they were actually launched at Menstrie. So these were exceptionally happy times, and ones where I was learning lots at that point.
Well, Caroline, thank you so much for your insight, and I suppose, and also thank you for the tireless work you put into Roe Co, whether it's the 106 blends to make it perfect, or working with Peter or Lora into the future and the experimentation of the brand itself. As I said at the very beginning, I'm pretty sure I've taken up a huge amount of capital of Diageo to have all three of you here tonight. I've never had a master blender, a head distiller, and a head brewer on at one time, and to cover all aspects of alcohol production from literally beginning to end has been absolutely fantastic. I want to say a very big thank you to all of you, but Caroline, particularly to you, a very big thank you and congratulations on your retirement. And
thank you.
I hope that this has been an insight to the people that are watching at home about the kind of foundation and the growth of Roe Co. And I very much hope you enjoy the new home and the new garden. And not only congratulations to you, but also to your husband, who is retiring on the same day. So I hope you have a great time.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. All the best.